Week's tools and CI meeting. I think we at the moment have a light agenda, which includes HBFA. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then kind of the follow-up topics of Edk2 Platforms and seeing what progress has been made there. And then I guess I'll ask real quick, just so we have kind of an agenda. Are there others with items they'd like to bring up today?
I guess while we're here, I'd just like to confirm that the dev container stuff is okay to get into the soft freeze that we have right now. My understanding is I have the act by from Mike, and it looks like Lemming's okay with it.
No issues. I mean, I think the only requirement, formal requirement, is that as long as the review is sent before the soft freeze, and then completes during the soft freeze, it can go in, no issues. It's things that are discovered during the soft freeze and during the hard freeze that are stricter, that are shared for the first time during the soft or hard freeze, that have stricter entrance criteria.
Okay, sounds good.
Any other topics for anyone? All right, should we talk about HBFA and the exciting updates?
All right, I'll grab the screen here if that's okay.
Perfect.
There we go. Are you guys seeing the regular slide deck or the notes? Just double checking.
I think we also got your teams and it's like two screens almost.
Two screens. Yeah. Interesting. All right, one moment.
We see the notes side of it.
Right. Apologies, bear with me 1 second. I'll switch up here. Let's see, are you all seeing that presentation okay?
Yep, that looks good.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Apologies for the delay there. First, my name is Lynn Tipton. I'm a security researcher at Intel. We have several other folks here on the line as well. So first, this work is a team of us, and we're on various different teams. I work in a team where our charge is to do software based fuzzing, whether it be for user land, systems level, or down into UEFI stack. And our charge is more or less to help enable fuzzing throughout Intel. And there's a number of us here from different groups that are working together to try to bring HBFA, add some enhancements, and really bring it into CI/CD. And we wanted to first thank you all for the opportunity to talk to you today, and just wanted to gauge interest and see if there's potential opportunities to upstream this and bring it out to the community, especially as we're moving forward. So some of the folks involved, of course, Mickey is involved with us, Brian Delgado, Eric Borges is on the phone or on the line as well, Lilia Barlow, Antonio Gomez Iglesias, and others. Also, Matthew Terrell is also on the team. He's been doing a parallel effort, working with KFL and bringing containers, as well as making installation and setup easier there, and bringing an environment for HBFA there as well. So for this talk, we'll focus on first just quickly touching back on what is HBFA, where is it residing at the moment. Then we'll go into kind of our motivations, our goals, what we're doing right now with working to enhance HBFA. Then we'll touch on kind of the current efforts underway, what kind of features we brought online and where we're going. Then we'll kind of just quickly step through a workflow example just so you get the gauge of the range of what's presently there. And then we'll go into kind of future ideas, what direction we were hoping to take things, as well as future feature ideas. And at any point in time, if there's an urgent question, don't hesitate to raise it. Likewise, at the end, we'll stop and take any questions and ideas and comments. So first, HBFA was contributed to the TNO core community back in 2019 from Intel. Right now, it resides in Edk2 staging as kind of its own little HBFA branch. And when that was released, that was along with a white paper and other documentation with the tool. And since then, it's had not a lot of development externally. There's been a little bit. I saw over the past year, someone added in kind of an additional AFL, he was AFL Turbo Fuzzer, but largely it's kind of remained static for the time being. Basically, it enables, especially if you have a unit testing as part of your workflow for, say, Dixie drivers or others, it allows you to readily, gives you an environment where you can run from a traditional operating system environment, hook in your fuzz harness and integrate with AFL, libfuzz, or Peach. The original incarnation gives a simple WX widgets-based GUI, as well as some additional toolages included to help with if you want to do fault injection, or if you want to leverage CLI to help generate, reach a code path and generate some seed corpus, as well as their support for LCOV for generating code coverage. And the original developers had introduced a lot of additional unit test cases that exercise a range of Edk2 functionality. So our motivation and goals have been largely driven by really just working to enable wider fuzzing efforts at Intel for UEFI. And here, it's essential that we have something in a container that can readily be automated, so we can take it out to groups, interface with them, find out their needs, and help them get it into their CI/CD environments. That was primary driver, but while we're taking off the bit rod and diving into this, we want to see if we can add some additional automation and capabilities as we're moving along. So one thing with the original tool is everything's there, but there was a lot of manual setup that had to be done for all of the additional fuzzers for AFL, Peach, and depending on what environment you're running on top of. There was a lot that needed to be done to kind of link the environment up, sync everything up so it was readily used. Likewise, while we're doing this, we wanted to take the opportunity to add in additional granularity and usage for sanitizers. So for example, in the original incarnation, there was support for address sanitizer. We wanted to work and add in memory sanitizer and undefined sanitizer with various levels of granularity whenever you want to build a test case and run it. Likewise, we wanted to add in some additional features for handling corpus files, for helping generate your code coverage, as well as if you have crashes from your fuzzing sessions, helping you generate some state information that you can pull out and report. As of present, our focus hasn't been on the GUI at all. It's really been get this in a container or Docker container environment and start kind of building up the environment and make it readily automated and kind of get some workflows so we can start interfacing with teams at Intel. So the current state, kind of where we're at right now, our approach was to actually leverage some of the builds at TNO core containers. And right now we initially chose the Fedora 35 image as our focal point, and we've been building off of that. We've added a lot of kind of additional things. So once the containers brought up and initialized, you're dropped into an environment that all of the commands can be readily accessed, whether you're building for Edk2 or building a test harness, and you want to automate getting that fuzzing, generating the coverage information, and kind of bundling everything together. Again, we were able to bring in newer versions of CLang, libfuzzer gave us access to ASON, MSON, and UBSON, as well as we were able to update to more or less the latest Peach community for that particular fuzzer. Likewise, we were able to bring in addition to LCOV support output for your code coverage, we're able to bring in an LLVM tool, and you can generate that output as well if you're doing fuzzing with CLang libfuzzer. Likewise, we've worked to add a few additional tools to make things easier in terms of pushing corpus files in or out, and same with crash triage. So for example, it can cycle through, if you have crashes, cycle through and emit GDB files with additional toolage you brought in, and get your crash dump, get your state at the time of crash, as well as whatever else needs to be layered in there, and then bundle everything together. And at the moment, because there's a time differential, we're currently testing and building against the latest Edk2. And we noticed that there's a differential where we were only able to get 12 of the 15 original unit fuzzing test cases built. So we want to work on either reaching out to the HBFA folks and or continue troubleshooting our own and try to get those all brought back into play as much as possible. And most importantly, while we've been doing this because we want to get it out to other folks at Intel and ideally externally as well, we wanted to make sure we're developing documentation as we move along. So we have kind of a quick start guide. It gets bundled in the container, but then of course is marked down and is convenient to use externally. And we kind of step through everything from building up the Docker container to various ways to invoke the fuzzing test cases, generate code coverage, and so forth. And this will continue to grow as we add more features. So just a high level view at the workflow, what is the kind of range of current capabilities we have. First, there's a Python-based tool we have that helps you generate your, well, first noting we're pulling in both the Edk2 from master, as well as we're pulling into the container the HBFA from staging. And then we're going to be applying a lot of different patches and things to kind of get everything to work and be able to use it against the latest versions of some of the software and to add some of the capabilities and features that we want into the code base. Ideally, that later would all be merged together. So basically, the starting point here is we have a Python tool that helps generate your Docker file. So it'll pull the latest Tiano Core Fedora 35 Docker file. And then from there, it'll insert our build targets for one is HBFA target. This will include AFL and libfuzzer, as well as there's a separate build target for Peach, just because the amount of things that need to be installed for Peach definitely increases the container size and may or may not be needed for what the person is intending to do. And we have an additional customization that we do to our Docker file. For example, in our case, some of the things to deal with our internal proxy, we can just tag it and say initialize my Docker file, and it'll put everything in there. So then when it builds a container, everything will play nice with our environment. Once that's done, then you'll actually build the Docker file, and that's invoked in a pretty traditional manner with Docker. And you'll build whichever target you select. During that process, again, it's going to pull Edk2, then it's going to pull and install AFL, CLang, LVM, any of the other packages and dependencies needed. It'll pull HBFA and apply a series of patches to add in our additional features, runtime options, a whole bunch of different things, and then basically set up the environment. So everything is readily, you can invoke the commands, the environment's set up, everything is there and seen in the environment. And then once you've built, then you basically just invoke the container. And of course, we'll get that in the next step. You could wrap that with any kind of a CI/CD environment that you have. If you choose just to attach and jump into the environment, it provides a nice kind of immediate playground that you could work manually. You can see on the bottom right of the slide, there's just a HBFA workspace is how we currently have it structured. All of your build targets will be under the build directory, and there's some additional kind of helper, fuzz crash helper. That's the tool that helps with going through all of your crash cases, emitting GDB scripts, and then rerunning those under that environment and capturing all of the information, as well as fuzz file helper that has some of the features to help with C corpus, pushing in and around. And again, yeah, Edk2 will be Edk2 build of everything that's there, as well as under the Edk2 staging directory, that'll be HBFA. And then of course, documentation, and you can see Peach there. So at the moment, what we've done is we have some example GitHub actions that we share internally and then reach out to folks. The goal is to work with them in whatever environment they have in particular, but this is just an example to kind of exercise the workflow. And the basic idea is, an action will kick off and it will build the Docker container, have it accessible, and then from there, it'll move and distribute the seed corpus for the test case, then build the particular test case that you want to run, whether it be for AFL, libfuzzer, or Peach, then initiate the run for some predetermined amount of time that you want to run your fuzz case. Once that's done, it's going to go back through, for example, all of the paths found and generate your code coverage and bundle, a fuzzing report, code coverage report, and then it'll check for any crashes and then parse through all the crashes and generate a GDB output and bundle that into a report. So basically everything is then transferred off of the container image to whatever location you want. As far as directions and future features, so right now we've kind of hit the bar for kind of basic level. Things are working. We can do an automated workflow. We have a container. Of course, there'll be more things to add, but we're at a good point where we're reaching out to different groups within Intel and working with them to try to get it into their particular environments. As we do this and they're able to exercise the tools, we'll find out where they're having issues, any improvements we need to make, new ideas, concepts, that kind of thing, and hopefully bring those back out and further mature the product. Additionally, as I mentioned before, Matthew Terrell is working on a KFL container, kind of a parallel effort that will also have HBFA support. And of course, our goal and what we'd love to do is work to get this upstreamed and out to the community. As far as future features, some of the things just kind of right off the bat that would be interesting, nice to start adding in would be additional support. So we're not just in Fedora 35. You have a container we can leverage the Ubuntu container, possibly the Windows. Right now, it just builds off of EDK master, but of course what would be nice is just allow the user to specify which builds they want, if they want multiple, and then that way we can track and maintain and make sure it works for all of those builds. Adding AFL++, that should be pretty straightforward. That'll be probably on the short list. Integrate and develop this container into something that falls and works in like a cluster fuzz type ecosystem. And then, further enhance and add tools, because one of the things is you're running this, you get a ton of crashes. Okay, now what? And the more we can do to kind of help collect and help inform the triage process post any detections, that will be very useful. And it's great if we can automate as much of that as possible. So of course, crash triage reporting, what we can do to assess the deduplication of crashes, as well as corpus handling and minimization. And last, one thing one could do that could be helpful is have some sort of web dashboard that can track, what jobs are out there in your ecosystem, what's the status, and then report, basically pull in all of those reports that we're generating and have them accessible from one master view. And last, have that, with some additional tools to help maintaining your test corpus for your test cases that you're running frequently. So yeah, looking for any ideas, comments, suggestions, questions. One, would there be interest in working to upstream this into HBFA as well into Edk2 CI/CD somewhere, if it would be helpful to you all. And likewise, also too, if you guys are interested in hearing about the KFL HBFA, we can talk with folks as well.
A couple quick questions on what's working so far. It looked like it was a GitHub action. Is that what you have working right now?
That is correct. Yeah.
And is that a manually invoked GitHub action with the ability for the user to enter options?
More or less, yeah. That's basically what it is right now. We just did a kind of a test case, and they can manually adjust the runtime and pick one for each different fuzzer. Okay. And yeah, the goal will be to have as many knobs on that as reasonable, so it can be easily brought into other groups.
Okay. And as far as the runtime is concerned, what for the use cases you've explored so far around Edk2 firmware sources, what's a typical runtime to get good data?
That is a good question. I don't have a precise metric. We're early in the phase of reaching out to different groups. A ballpark, maybe I'll throw out 20 hours, but I don't really have a solid assessment on that.
Okay. And then as far as like, because that's interesting because I think the open source default GitHub actions, I think they're at a limit of 120 minutes, 2 hours. Is that right, Sean?
I don't remember for sure, but yes, it's definitely limited.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
a job that would runs like this, it almost requires, if you like to get good
Yeah.
fidelity from the result is like a 20-hour run. I
Yeah.
think you're almost into the space that you have to stand up your own agents to dispatch the
To
job.
do it. Yeah, valid question and point.
Can you
Would it not-
speak to any of the test cases? Like what code have you done fuzzing on and been successful with?
So at the moment, we've stood things up with just the included test cases with HBFA, and that's covering a number of different things. Some of them are down in, for example, some of the functionality that handles BMP image for the boot, as well as some of the components that support various file systems, like UDF, some of the stack, I think, for PEI USB, and I'm trying to recall some of the others. Basically, largely what was just included with the original HBFA.
Okay.
Could this also be set up with just a predefined corpus that only tested previous findings to validate that we haven't regressed?
Yes, you should be able to, based on the corpus.
That corpus is also something that'll help cut the run times. You know, if we have a better
Yeah.
corpus, you know, won't have to rediscover all of those test cases, and we can kind of leverage
Yes.
that going forward. Yeah.
That was my question.
Gotcha.
Right.
Thank you.
How tied to EDK2 is it? You know, so I guess my thought is that a lot of us have downstream repos that, you know, this could be useful on. I've noticed that you pulled EDK2 in directly. Is that a hard requirement, or do you see that this being a container that you could share with anyone's repo as long as it met a certain set of requirements?
Right now it's been tied to HBFA, but we could generalize it. Are you thinking of someone's fork for EDK2 or something more, you know, with larger deviation?
I mean, yeah, it'd probably be considered a fork. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that seems like it wouldn't be too bad. But yeah, that's definitely a very good point, and I will note that down. And it will be good to be thinking towards keeping this as generalizable as possible for that scenario.
Is the documentation on the HBFA branch up to date for the containers and stuff? Because it looks like some of it hasn't been updated in a.
So we have
Wow.
not touched EDK2 staging the HBFA. What we've been doing is entirely inside at Intel right now. And this is kind of our initial reach out to gauge interest and hopefully try to upstream a lot of this as we're working and moving this forward. The documentation there can be issues, especially depending on the versions of software involved. Some of the steps won't work. And we had to address some of those while bringing things up to newer versions of software for this effort.
Okay, and the container images, are those publicly available that you're basing off the Tiana Core containers?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. That's the hope. Yeah, we have to go through a process here.
And what's the size growth that you're seeing from the base container until you put your content in it?
Depends. So we haven't gone for really optimizing things. A lot of it was sorting out the issues. It's say a little under a gigabyte for HBFA, but when you add in Peach, there's a lot of dependencies for mono and a lot of other things. It gets quite large, gigabyte, plus gigabyte.
Okay.
I don't recall off the top of my head how big it was, but yeah. Preferably
Okay,
to have your image cached.
And where was the, so I assume the GitHub action that you're testing on is not public either right now.
Negative, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and looked for the HBFA Docker script, and that's not anywhere public either.
None of this is out yet. This has just
I
been
do-
kind of an initial dive into it, get kind of initial proof of concept and workflow sorted out. And now let's reach out externally, let's reach out internally, and try to really get this to where we can make it useful for you all and get it into people's hands.
I do plan on having him bring this to the community also at the regular monthly community meeting at some point in the future. But we wanted to gauge interest here in the CI/CD area space first.
I guess, well, I'm interested, but I was like, whenever we turn this on, I guess this goes back to the regression thing. Is if we were to turn this on and kind of form a baseline of running it in CI, is it like manageable at the moment in terms of the issues found and what we would be able to base on, or are there just tons of issues that you see that are not reported or resolved or something? Like where do the results stand, I guess, that you're seeing on EDK2?
On EDK2, okay. Am I okay to talk about anything yet, or?
I think
you
in
feel-
general, like we have a
Yeah.
lot of control over which harnesses get enabled
Yeah.
with your build. And I think you have seen a couple crashes that
Yeah.
are being triaged.
Yes.
And I anticipate once that's fixed, then we'll have sort of a steady state where, the harnesses that we've enabled, should probably not be crashing unless there's some code regression.
Yeah.
Nothing
I'd be-
crazy. We had that similar concern when we started with this, and it wasn't crazy, so it was manageable.
I presume this is something that be run like weekly, but surely can't be run on every commit if it's taking like 24 hours.
But yeah, we haven't done a lot of testing over a wide range of scenarios, as well as, a lot of what we've done internally, we've been building up corpus as well. So, once you have that, again, the fuzz times may go down considerably
Of
to
course.
get some meaningful results.
Yeah, I'm thinking as far as how to make this practical for usage on the open source EDK2 or other parts of the TNO core projects is the full analysis that generates the corpus would probably be something more of a manually invoked job. But as I said, it can't run in the GitHub agents because they'll time out after 2 hours and kill your job. So I don't know if you thought about the idea that what if developers actually run that part locally to generate the corpus and then can upload the corpus.
Yeah, no, I had not. I think that's a great suggestion. We've been using kind of internally self-hosted runners, so we hadn't had too many issues. But yes, that is a very good point.
Okay. And then the second item, which I think that's been suggested here, is that if you have a database of corpuses to run, I don't know how long it would take to run through those. It's probably longer than what we could afford for a every commit kind of change.
Mhm.
So maybe that's something that we could schedule as a once a week or run different corpus sets at different days through the week to get some coverage post commit on the open source to see if we've had any regressions, and then investigate the regressions post commit.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you can be a little bit more selective even with that. If you have zero code change in a set of code for a specific harness, you can skip that one.
Sure. Yep.
So if we need a custom GitHub runners, I've got a couple of servers that we could run it on.
I think, Mike, we can get away with a little bit more on GitHub workflows than we can on Azure ones on the pipelines, but it's probably 6 hours max at the most there.
Okay. And I imagine these jobs don't parallelize well, right?
Yeah, not unfortunately, yeah, not very well. That's another area we could try to see if there's anything we can come up with.
Lynn, couldn't we run various harnesses sort of in parallel because they're sort of discrete? They're not
Yes,
like we're
that-
using all 64 cores on one harness, but we could, use
Yeah,
one thread
Yeah.
per harness and do that in parallel maybe.
yes, that would be viable.
Yeah, basically you end up with a workflow with multiple jobs. Each job will have the 6-hour time limit, whatever it is on GitHub.
Yeah.
You can probably make a lot of progress that way.
So I think one thing that'd be interesting to know for us is, what is the appetite for pushing this? Are we seeing pull for, needing fuzzing? Are we finding that this is kind of a common concern that needs to be remedied? What is the sense here from the group?
I think there's a fair amount of agreement that we should be doing more than we are. I think from our side, there's definitely a perspective that we know there's issues out there. We need to, we have such low code coverage for unit testing in general that there's a lot of room for improvement in all different areas. But I definitely think there's appetite for getting this enabled, from my side at least.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you see as like a rough timeline to be able to get maybe a set of public collateral that people could play around with?
What do we need to do, Lynn, to get this out in the public? I'm not sure about the process. From a technical standpoint, everything is done. I don't know if we need to do some internal process.
Yeah, there would be internal process. We could do a little bit of code cleaning before it goes external, but proof of concept is there. And yeah, we were hoping, pushing internally as well to get kind of that good feedback loop there as well to add any, additional enhancements. But in principle, we're getting there.
I would like to bring you to the regular community also, Lynn, and have you do this same presentation.
Cool. Thank you.
Because I think if nothing else, we could at least get a pull request out there that people could pull and actually try and test and get some, get some global information going on this.
Yeah, I think having the PR sitting out there so that people can look at it during the presentation would be a good choice.
Yeah, I think presentation wise, it looks good. I think that next level would be nice to get to.
And also now that I think about it, probably from internal process, actually, you're probably good to go, Lynn.
Okay. It's good to hear.
It should be pretty quick.
Would anyone on your team be willing to kind of lead the effort in identifying areas of EDK2 that would be prime for fuzzing? Like I feels like to me that there's still some gap in our community's knowledge of fuzzing and what are the the easiest ones, what are the most impactful interfaces to be looking at.
John, at least I think the material I've seen in the past is looking at your threat model and your security boundaries and your software architecture, and any APIs that cross a security boundary are prime targets for early fuzz testing. And also anything that gets untrusted data.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, has there been by your team, Lynn, or Mike, by you guys around, you know, a prioritized list of those interfaces that we should be looking at first?
Not that I know of off the top of my head. I can ask around.
I think the harnesses have been enabled so far, kind of a starting place, but I think there's room for growth. And typically some of the SMI handlers are always of interest, especially if they take some data that could be somewhat complex. This whole approach, by the way, is a user space fuzzing. So we have to use shim libraries to do the fuzzing. So basically, the harnesses are building in Linux. The other effort that Lynn alluded to is the KAFL, which is designed, more for the OVMF environment, where we can leverage the emulator and the QEMU environment. But that's sort of a different effort that's being developed. But that might have like different targets. For example, if there's more, driver code that can leverage the emulator.
But at this point, it's a much more hands-on approach also.
Yeah, I would say HBFA is, I think, a lighter lift than KAFL, just because it has less dependencies on the emulator and things like processor trace. Just pure software on HBFA.
And Lynn, you also have a question on the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat right now.
Oh, negative. I cannot. Let me see if I can get to it.
Or Rainish, if you want to say something.
Yeah, apologies. Didn't see that. Thank you, Antonio.
So I think the answer is really sort of yes. It just, it just takes time to build all the harnesses. So certain libraries would be great to fuzz. One of the examples that is already out there is the safe-int-lib. We're also looking at things like, the runtime interfaces are great. The COM buffer interface between runtime and SMM is a good place to go fuzz. It's just, it's going back to do we have a prioritized list? And, I think runtime would probably be a good one to go look at. I think we have some other items that we may want to go see if we want to expand. Like, I know we process I think we have one for the fat partition driver as well. Yeah.
Correct.
I assume like variable services, authenticated variables, secure boot, authentic code would all be top of the list.
Yep.
All right, well, sounds great. I guess I'll look forward to the community-wide presentation, and then, as soon as you guys can push something public, I think that sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you all for the letting us talk to you, and yeah, sounds great.
And I'll get with you on the community aspect of this, Lynn.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mickey.
Are you going to send those slides out?
I believe that's okay. Anyone know if there's any issues? I can generate a PDF and send a copy.
You can send it, just create the PDF and that's it.
Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, we'll do. Yeah, we'll get them
Kevin,
out to
these
you.
meetings are also posted to YouTube, so they live on forever.
True, but then somebody has to understand English well enough to translate.
Fair enough.
They can read. My team can read really well. Not everyone can understand.
I
So,
did post.
yes, a
2
question.
weeks ago, I
Sorry.
posted the transcript. If you want that done more regularly, Kevin, if that would be helpful, I'm happy to do that too.
Sure.
Just a question of the slides. So how do we share them? Who do we send them to?
Can you just post them right here?
I think you could put them on the discussions page for the meeting as well.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else want to bring up anything? We ready to jump into EDK2 platforms and any other discussion there? Mike or Isaac, I think you guys have been, hopefully you have the most feedback for anything going on in EDK2 platforms.
So my status of the stewards is that the stewards meeting was pushed out a week, so that'll be a discussion topic this week.
Isaac, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm on. I don't have any updates for this week, but I was wondering if you're planning to submit your changes, your branch to the trunk.
I mean, if everyone's happy with how we did it, right, there was some discussion there about how we track the EDK2 dependency. And, you know, we're not using submodules in that branch. I think that was probably the only controversial thing in the branch was how would we track the EDK2 dependency. So otherwise, I'm happy to send it if that's okay.
Do we have an alternate solution? So it's currently a submodule in your branch, right? EDK2.
No, in the branch, it's much like your manifest file, but it's actually just in the Python file. There's basically a function that returns some Git information about dependencies, and it returns
Okay, it's
those.
part of the Stewart configuration.
Yep.
Then. Yeah. Okay. The init.
I mean, alternative, we do have other options in Stewart. Obviously, we also have the manifest tool, or we have submodules. But I think those conversations have all kind of dried up, and they're stuck at with nobody yet having to make a decision.
Okay, let me think about that and see if I have anything I'd like to propose then. You know, it doesn't feel like adding the EDK Revo tool into the mix makes it easier.
Yeah, I agree, and we've kind of had that question of where do we maintain the manifest, and like, do we stand up yet another repo for that manifest? And then you have questions. Yeah.
All right, yeah, let me think about it and see if I can propose anything for next week.
I wasn't here last week, but what was going on with the stewards that we're waiting for?
Just a discussion on the ARM platforms within EDK2 platforms. Ownership.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think we've gotten, you know, some feedback from Intel around their platforms. And then I think everyone else has been silent that owns other platforms and EDK2 platforms. So it's hard to make any kind of sweeping change or propose an RFC if we can't get any feedback. All right, are there other topics for today?
I guess I want to do a quick moving to PR check to see where we're at. I don't know if we've talked about that in a while.
No status on that.
Okay. Is there still like a technical blocker, or is it lack of bandwidth?
Bandwidth.
Okay.
And I did briefly mention in the community meeting when this came up last week is that One assessment that has not been done recently is to see if GitHub has improved their data retention of review comments in the scope of commits, across a forced push. So if
Okay.
anybody wants to go do some investigation of that and provide feedback, that'd be useful information to see if there's anything that's changed there.
And just to be
Okay.
clear, you're saying that like someone leaves a comment and a PR on a change, and then another commit is force pushed to the PR branch, and you want to check if the comment stays? Is that what you're checking
Yeah,
for?
but there's
Okay.
two scopes that the comments can be left at. One is at the scope of the entire PR, where you see the total set of files modified. And you can open a review there at that scope of the PR. For those changes that are submitted as a patch series, it's also possible to leave comments on an individual commit. And then if you do a forced push, those previous commits may become orphaned. And I want to know that if there's something that's improved in GitHub where all of the information, whether it was captured as review comments at the PR scope or at the commit scope, if they're all preserved and browsable across forced pushes, such that the PR contains the complete record of all review activity at both scopes.
Okay. I mean, we push series and we do rebase, fast forwards, and squashes on those, but I think that we just always leave comments at the PR level and they're fine across force pushes.
Yes.
I wasn't aware. Why do we want to do it at the commit level?
Because if you think about the reason one of the reasons we typically break up a patch into a patch series is because there's different maintainer ownership for different commits, because they've done things in one package versus another package for the set of changes, such that the reviewers, it may be more natural for them to review their specific ownership content at the commit scope, because they have direct responsibility for the content of one of the commits, but not others. They're also responsible for giving a review feedback approval as a maintainer or reviewer for the entire series as well, but their specific feedback may be easier to provide, looking at the commits that are in the packages that they own.
Okay, so you're basically using it like a filter mechanism to filter their changes down. Okay.
And the reason why that very detailed technical element of how GitHub works is important is that with the previous understanding of how it worked, where the information was lossy at the commit scope review comments across forced pushes, it required, in order for us to create the email archive, we had to have something that was actively monitoring all of the activity continuously, because there could be some review comments and then a forced push a short time thereafter, and we would lose some of the information at the commit scope across the forced push. So we had to respond to the review comments as soon as they were entered, and such that they could then be collected into an email archive of that review activity. If there's been a change in the way that GitHub works where that information is preserved, it would allow us to, for example, when the PR is ultimately accepted, or more like on a cron job periodically, look at the state of the PRs and collect the email information periodically, without having to have an active service that's running continuously. So it changes the way that we can monitor and generate the emails from an active service to a much more of a cron job kind of activity, or based upon like a close action on the PR if it's merged or abandoned.
Last time we talked, Mike, I thought we had kind of agreed that we wanted to encourage everyone to use the review kind of workflow to add their comments. So I guess I still hope that we can go with that requirement, that they should not be opening up commits and commenting on random commits around the tree. But I think I agree, it's still important that we make sure all the code paths in the review workflow issue comments that are associated with that pull request.
Yeah, and there's kind of two elements there to that. One is, I think with the simplified workflow that we've been suggesting around this, reviewers and maintainers that want to give their final reviewed by have to do that at the PR scope. Okay, because they are ultimately responsible, even though they may only be responsible for one commit out of the 5 there. They still have to look at the series as a whole and make sure that their elements that they have ownership for look correct for interaction with the rest of the components. So I think that's clear that their final approval needs to be done at the PR scope. What I can't necessarily, say for certain, we can recommend that everyone review things at the PR scope. But given that we do have this natural, filtering, and that GitHub actually supports providing comments at the commit scope, I don't know how we prevent that, and I don't want information loss.
I mean, I think we'd all learn quickly to add their comments at the review scope. And I think the information loss would actually be, in fact, significantly less than the information loss we get today on the mailing list. But I still hear your concern.
Right. And I know we get just historically have seen, comments about if a developer submits for review a change that does a combination of some functional change, maybe just a couple lines, along with some reformatting changes before we had Uncrustify, for example. There'd be complaints from the reviewer saying, please split that up into 2 commits so that I can review the logical change separate from the formatting change. If you're forcing everybody to do things at the file scope, you're going to see everything mashed back together again. And so, that's an example where the preference may be, if they have a concern about the functional change, they'll want to leave that comment in the one commit that contains the small functional change.
I think Michael and I can go off and play with the way you can filter through the reviews, because there has been additions in that over the last couple of years that have let you filter that down to the commits that you want to see. And so I think we can do that and make sure that the comments that you leave are associated correctly.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Is that the main thing, Mike, or is there other blockers that you see?
Well, that piece of data will significantly change how the email archive is created and the service that's required to do it. I prefer the simpler one where we can do it as a cron job, and don't have to have an active server running 24/7.
Okay.
All right. I mean, I guess the thing I would add to that is I've seen a number of email threads and discussions end with, well, once we have PRs, this will all be fixed, or it'll be better. We got to get line of sight to getting to PRs. I think there is getting to be a large portion of the community, not just myself and my team, that now want PRs. So I hope that we can get that prioritized. Are there other topics for today? All right. Well, I guess I look forward to hearing.
One last thing. On the tool chain update, adding VS22, dropping old compilers. Is that something that we wanted to try to do after the stable tag? Do people think? I don't know when a better time would be.
What do you mean by older compilers? Is it VS 2017?
Yes, maybe that and earlier. I thought 15 was still there. Maybe not, and some older ones like that.
Yeah, I think last I checked, we had that to like VS 2008.
Yes, yes, yeah. Getting rid of the lower portion of those, I guess.
So there's two. So are you talking about for the CI agent runs moving from 2019 to 2022, Michael? Or are you talking about changing tools depth?
Tools depth.
Okay. Where are we on our CI agents right now? Are we running just still 2019?
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Is there a desire to move to 2022 anytime soon for the CI agents?
I think we should do it. I mean, I think for cleanliness and setting the example of trying to stay current, right? That's what we should move. I don't think there's any major feature that changes in the firmware space for it, but I think, you know, just staying current is important.
Okay. Is that what you're also suggesting we do after the stable tag?
Yes.
Okay. I'd start there. Isaac, you and I probably need to talk about 2015.
Okay.
You know, when we started this meeting a while ago, we were gonna try to get owners for each tool chain. So I think I'll reply to myself with that email that was to the community asking people to come forward that want to maintain a tool chain. At the moment, I think Andrew Fish is the only one who came through with Xcode, and then I think I was going to stand up for VS 2022 and 2019. So we still, I guess my point is, if you can bring that up at the stewards meeting, I think we didn't even get a GCC, you know, maintainer that's willing to be the owner of that. So I think we need to get better ownership there.
I'd hope that we can delete GCC 4.8 and 4.9 support.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the last email I sent on the list, which at this point was probably a year ago, was like, you know, we only have these two tool chains covered. All the rest would be deleted if we're going to follow through with what we said. And that still didn't drive anyone to reply. So I think at the stewards level, we're going to have to talk about GCC.
And I'm curious, Sean, do we have a sense for how many bug reports we've had against tool chain configurations in the past year?
I don't.
Oops,
Yeah.
sorry, go on.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've reported bugs against Xcode. There were a few bugs that I've reported, possibly not in Bugzilla, but on the mailing list.
I mean, I can say from a proprietary code base, I've seen that basically every vendor I ever work with has their own tools def with their own hacked up stuff. So I'd say that our, you know, as trying to get a baseline for both EDK2 as well as, you know, downstream out of tree projects, we're not succeeding at that today.
Do you have a sense for the reason why they have customizations?
Well, you can ask your own team for one of them. It's just, I don't actually have a great sense. I mean, well, to be fair, we, even in Project Mu and open source, we have changes to tools def. So I think it's just kind of been a sloppy space and it's still treated that way. And I think it'd be wise for us to try to get all that cleaned up.
Okay.
You know, in Project Mu, we have 4K alignment, so we can do page protections on every Dixie and SMM module. I think that's probably the biggest change we have.
Right, and that's an example of you've done an extra feature, above and beyond what EDK2 does by default with the SMM modules.
Yeah, I mean, but I think at this point, we probably want to start seeing stronger memory protections and paging done in EDK2 as well.
The reason I asked about the bugs is that, having ownership, when there's an area that needs, care and attention for bugs and resolving them and fixing them, that ownership's really critical. If the set of toolchain tags that are there that are being actively used by downstreams and there's no bugs against them and they're not finding real bugs in the flag settings, then the criticality of ownership versus downstreams are just using those ones that have been well used in the past with no issues. It's one of those things as far as what statements you're wanting to make about level of support. So I absolutely appreciate trying to get owners nailed down, but if we have areas where there's real no bug reports, not as opposed to feature enhancements, how critical is an owner?
That's a fair point. I guess on GCC, we definitely have seen some activity there, right? GCC 12, it didn't work for the longest time. I don't know if it does right now. I think our containers are locked in at a version in the 11 series because it didn't work. I don't know how they're currently figuring out who's going to go make changes to actually make it compatible with GCC 12. So there is activity there, even though the GCC 5 toolchain hasn't changed itself for a while. There's definitely things that go on. It seems like every year.
I wonder if we should check which GCC version we're running when the build starts and error out if it's not marked as if we haven't updated it to be compatible, because otherwise people run into these random compiler errors.
I mean, that's kind of why we wanted to move into containers, right? Is it gave us what we hoped was the best and most logical or standard way of managing these dependencies, right? Is that the container has a GCC version. Generally it's from the distro's repository, and then it can be. We can say that CI is using this version of the container and this version passed. So we have a clear chain back to the version of GCC that we support.
Yeah, I mean, for me at least, Docker isn't going to work because it's not available on FreeBSD, NetBSD, Solaris, etc. Yeah, it's just not something I see myself, or I think many other people aren't going to use containers.
Is it still easy enough for you to be able to see from, I think the build report shows what version of GCC we're running, and thus you should be able to, from any of our CI builds, see, what versions passed and are supported.
Yeah, I think the point here is that if the developer's not running in a container on their own development system and they're running a downgrade GCC for which we know there's issues, if part of the startup of the build could say you've got too old of a version of GCC you're using, because they're all GCC 5 from a toolchain tag, right? But if the specific version that they're running on top of is considered unsupported at all, that might be useful information so they know to update their GCC version for their local development builds.
Right. Yeah, too old is I was really thinking of too new because for GCC 10, 11, 12, etc. each time we've had delays, and so I know that I've run the OpenSUSE GCC repo. And that's often pulled in a much newer version that is supported, and so yeah, it's like having to realize, oh yeah, that's too new, I have to downgrade.
Okay. I mean, so regardless, Mike, I think there is some room for additional, ownership of the tool chains. That task obviously would need to get done somehow, and that version maintained, right? Especially if it's a upward version. that you have to track. So if you're able to check with, I guess Leif and Andrew, they seem like they're both central to some of these conversations.
Agreed. Will do.
All right. Anything else from anyone? All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sean.
Yep,
Thanks,
thank you,
Lynn, for
everybody.
presenting.
Take care. Thank you all.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye.